to talk about high-frequency words. High-frequency words are the most common words written in English. Does anyone have a guess what the most common word is? Yeah, it is. There it is, the. So, what do you notice about the 100 most frequently used words in English? And these are from the Oxford English Corpus, which contains over 2.1 billion words of text, which they have analyzed to determine what are the 100 most frequently used words. What do you notice about them?
A lot of exceptions to the rule.
Most are one syllable.
Short.
Very short. Yep, a lot of grammar words, a lot of words that you need to construct a sentence. What they have determined is that 100 of the 100 most frequently used words are half of all written texts. So these are the words you need to write a sentence in English. And the first 25 words make up a third of all written texts. So this is true whether you're reading a children's book or whether you're reading a dissertation on physics. So you need these little grammatical terms to convey thoughts and to put together sentences. So knowing how to read and spell these words is really important to fluency and to success in reading.
So you're going to find the list of Dolch words in your activity directions. You're going to need to cut the words out so they should look something like this, and you only need one set per group. You're going to go through these words and sort them into basically two groups, ones that you can explain based on what you've learned in this training and ones you still have questions about. Then after you go through them the first time, you're going to take that group of words you still have questions about and check your phonogram and spelling rule quick reference guide. So remember, all the phonograms and their sounds, as well as the spelling rules, can be found on this quick reference guide. So you're really going to want to take a look and see if any of the answers to your questions are here. Now, if you're still stuck on some, you're going to take your resource of sounding out the sight words. And this is a great resource because the Dolch words are all listed in the index in the back. So you can look up the particular words that you have questions about, and it'll tell you exactly what page to go to, and you can see what rules apply to those words and the explanations for them.
All right, now that you've finished sorting the Dolch words and thinking about how and why each of them are spelled and read the way that they are, and look them up and sounding out the sight words, I just want to go over them with you. You had 315 Dolch words that you sorted, and I just want you to pause and think about the fact that these 315 words are commonly taught as sight words, meaning in this context that they are to be memorized as whole words. And when that happens, well, we've already learned the neuroscience, right, about this. That's a very difficult process to memorize these by rote, but you have now been explaining why and have been able to explain that. You'll also have noticed that there are some of these words that are exceptions, or maybe that you had questions to. Out of the 315 words, most people have questions about 15 of those words that are exceptions or that don't line up quite like they expect to sound them out easily, or like I said, are just plain up exceptions. So 15 of 315 is 5%. And if you'll remember, many phonics programs leave anywhere from 40 to 60% of those words as exceptions. And that's a lot of exceptions. So this is much better at 5%, right, that you might have questions about. Well, let's look through these words together. So first of all, a few of the words are completely phonetic, like I and you. They're just rule breakers. So these words break the rule. English words do not end in I, U, V, or J. Now, the way I like to teach these to kids are you and I are very special, so we get to end in you and I. So some of you may count these as exceptions because they break that rule. Others of you may say, well, that's perfectly phonetic and able to be read. So it's up to you, what category those two fall in. Some of these words are a question of dialect. So for example, we have the word ben. In standard US dialect, we say ben, but EEE always says E. And the reality here, though, is that if you go north a little ways to Canada, or if you go to the UK, people say bean. So this is an exception in American dialects, but we will say to spell bean. This is why it's written this way. Another example of this is the word again, and in many dialects it is said again. So that AI saying the long A sound, like in again, and that's the way it's said in other places, explains that spelling. So this can be an issue of dialect. Another word that people often have questions about is the word picture. And picture is explained through assimilation. So assimilation is when sounds that are close together assimilate or become a new sound. If we were to say picture, just like it's written, picture, and then say it faster and faster, picture, 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 you hear that tu changing into a ch sound. So we will say to spell picture, but it's picture. So that's called assimilation, and this happens a lot with those long U sounds. Another explanation for some of these words that are rule breakers phonetically is morphology. And many of these we already looked at when we talked about vocabulary. But let's look at them again. So we have the number 2, and that W, it looks like it says twu. That W is silent. But this is because words like twin, twice, 12, 20 all start with twa, and twa means two. Probably at one time we said twu and it's dropped out, but because of morphology, English is a balance between sound and meaning, we leave that W there. Another example is the number 1. And again, we talked about the number 1 in the morphology and vocabulary section, as well as the word once. But the word lone means one. If there's a lone bird in the sky, there's one. If you're alone in the room, there's one person in the room. And that own ending, O-N-E, means one. So this helps us to explain the number 1, which has a variation again phonetically, and the word once. Another word on our list is the word only. And what's interesting about this word is you hear the own, and it still refers to one. However, that O is saying its long sound not at the end of the syllable, in a closed syllable. But it comes from this. So this is an exception, again, to the spelling rules, but it's not an exception when you think about it morphologically, and also a, o, u, it does say one of its sounds. So again, some people categorize these as exceptions. Some people, when we're doing these in a training, will go, oh, that's not an exception, it's about morphology, so that makes perfect sense. Another word people have questions about is the word said. And said is also explained by morphology. So we have the word pay, and the past tense is paid. We have the word lay, and the past tense is laid. So you can see that 2-letter A that we may use at the end of English words becomes 2-letter A that we may not use at the end of English words in the past tense. Well, the same thing is happening in say and said. Now, we don't say said. Maybe they did at one time, but you can see the pattern here. So when we teach the word said, we teach it within the context of this past tense pattern. So it is definitely following the pattern, though there is, again, truly an exception to the way that phonogram is said. Now, there are a few words that are true exceptions, and you'll have found that when you were looking them up and sounding out the sight words. But let's just talk about these as well for a few minutes. So we have the word who, and it sounds almost like the is silent there. You definitely hear the oo sound, but if you say wa, or wa, this also can be an unvoiced sound like we talked about earlier, wa. What's interesting about that is you can feel that it's forward in your mouth, just like the oo sound is. So who is coming from that. That sound is an unvoiced who at the beginning here. But since many people pronounce that as wa, we count this in the exceptions category. But it's explained with the, how your mouth is forming those sounds. 2 more words are any and many. And in these words, that a, aw is saying the S sound. Now, when we look at the words any and many, it's true that the saying is an exception, but I want you to notice the rest of the word is completely regular. So though there's an exception, most of the sounds in these exception words are regular. It's usually just one sound. The same with pretty. We hear that saying the sound. This is an exception, but again, most of the word is regular. So we can just talk about, yeah, that is saying That's kind of unusual or very unusual. The word of is also interesting because the O is saying the schwa sound. This is a short word with where it's unstressed. So this isn't an important word. We talked about this in the schwa segment. But what's happening with the f? We don't say uff. But if you say f and v, you'll notice that they're said in the same place in the mouth. And if you place your hand on your throat, you'll see that f and v are a voiced and unvoiced pair. So maybe at some point it was uff, and over time that became a voiced sound of. And by the way, in one word study that looked at 90,000 words, this is the only place where the F was saying the V sound. So it really is an exception, but it's really interesting, isn't it, how the pronunciation changed over time to something that's so close in the mouth. And then the last word we'll look at is the word I. And I will say that this is probably the most unusual word in the English language. We have this silent E here, and it could be to make the word longer. But we have the Y saying I, which could make sense, but where that E at the beginning comes from, I don't know. And when you look it up, the etymology of this word as well, there aren't really great explanations for the spelling of this word. But it's fascinating, isn't it, that this is the one word that I'll say, this is very unusual. When we look at the Dolch words, out of them, 2% are what we would categorize as true exceptions. 2 to 5% of these words need a little bit of extra explanation. You can sound out the others perfectly, phonetically. You don't even need to say that's an exception to one of the spelling rules. And something else that's interesting about exceptions is most of the exceptions to the English language, to the phonetics, to truly good systematic phonics, are found in short words. And the reason is those one-syllable words are original English words, and they're very, very old. So they've had a lot of time to change in pronunciation over time, and that's where those exceptions become generated. So I just would like to ask you what you would like to teach. Would you like to teach the rules that explain, say, 98% of English words, or would you like to continue to memorize sight words? Because if you teach sight words, if you just think about the strategy of this, you were to teach one sight word or one phonogram or spelling rule a day, this graph will help you to understand that you'll learn one word a day with sight words, whereas as you learn those phonetic concepts, those unlock thousands of additional words. It's very powerful to have these tools. This also leads us to the question then, what is a sight word? You were looking at that at the beginning of this training. You created a poster about this, and I'm hoping that your definition of sight words has changed. What I like to talk about is high frequency words. It is important to practice these words so that we can read and spell them quickly and without thinking, to have mastered them. But they shouldn't be taught as sight words, meaning to memorize them rotely by sight. And we talked about this during the neuroscience of reading, or the science of how we learn to read. But teaching students to read sight words trains the wrong part of the brain. Instead of teaching this list of words, again, by rote memory, we need to be teaching kids how to read and spell those words, which then unlocks thousands of other words. Here's how one researcher puts it. It's like shifting the gears of the mind when you focus your attention on different information associated with a word. You amplify different brain circuits. So if we teach phonics and then a little later in the day teach a sight word, we're asking kids to use different parts of their brain, and we're confusing them, like, how do you really learn to read? We need to be consistent in how we instruct and teach the reasons for these words right from the beginning. And a really great resource for this is sounding out the sight words. So you have just used that in your activity, and if your school requires you to teach sight words, certain ones per grade, or to teach them out of order what you would be teaching in foundations, go ahead and look up that word in sounding out the sight words, and then teach the phonograms, teach the spelling rules needed for that word right away to your class. Just teach that concept so that they have it, apply it, and then they can read that word. I'll just leave you with this thought of how has your understanding of sight words changed compared to what you said at the beginning of the course and where you're at now. And I'd really challenge you to stop teaching words by rote memory, but to really teach the critical thinking skills that kids need to unlock any word.